Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. It's President Trump's proclaimed Liberation Day, the day he plans to hit multiple countries, including Canada, with reciprocal tariffs. Plus, election campaigns focus on energy, healthcare, and affordability, while Carney pauses his campaign to have meetings ahead of expected levies. And sad news out of Hollywood. Actor Val Kilmer dies at the age of 65.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. All eyes are on U.S. President Donald Trump today as he hits multiple countries with reciprocal tariffs on what he calls Liberation Day in the United States. These tariffs will increase U.S. duties to match the tax rates other countries charge on imports. While making his announcement late this afternoon, Trump presented a lengthy list of what percentage tariff various countries will face under new measures. He did not specify how Canada will be affected. Trump announced a 10% baseline tariff on imports from all countries, with higher tariff rates on dozens of countries that run trade surpluses with the United States. Trump held up a chart while speaking at the White House showing the highest tariff rates the U.S. would charge, but Canada and Mexico were not on the list. He also announced a 25% tariff on all automobile imports from other countries would take effect at midnight.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt, and it'll all happen very quickly.
Liberal leader Mark Carney paused his campaign today to take part in meetings in Ottawa ahead of the expected levies. But at a news conference Tuesday in Winnipeg, he referenced his recent phone call with Trump, saying he would reject all attempts to weaken Canada. Carney said that he has a plan to deal with tariffs and that he was turning the focus on his campaign to affordability.
We have a plan, and it's detailed. And we need one because this will go a long way to help Canadians weather the storm intensified by President Trump's tariffs. And this is all before we take the measures that will create higher paying jobs, such as creating one Canadian economy out of 13 that we have today, and measures to diversify our trading partners around the world.
During a campaign stop in Edmonton on Tuesday, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh vowed to crack down on, quote, so-called cash-for-care clinics that charge Canadians for basic services and ban American firms from buying up Canadian health care assets.
We also heard recently from Mark Carney that he said he would not expand pharmacare. And we're not surprised by that. I don't think anyone should be surprised by that, because the Liberals would have never brought in pharmacare but for New Democrats fighting for it and forcing them to do it. And it shows you again that the Liberals are not committed to healthcare. They're not committed to pharmacare. They're not going to expand it. So we got Mark Carney, who's not going to stand up and defend our healthcare. We know that Pierre Poilievre is going to accelerate selling it off and privatizing it. So who's going to stand up for you and your family to ensure that healthcare is never on the negotiating table, that we defend our public universal healthcare? That's New Democrats.
Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre promised to enact 5 recommendations put forward by the country's energy sector. He spoke while campaigning in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador.
The energy companies themselves, the 14 biggest of them, wrote all of us a letter. Every national leader, Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Green Bloc, wrote us all a letter with 5 demands. They said, either you do these 5 things or we will not be able to grow and break our dependence on the Americans. They're very specific. 1, repeal the No New Pipelines law and the tanker ban so that we can ship our resources to non-American markets. 2nd, it now takes, after the lost Liberal decade, it now takes 17 years to get a mine approved, while other countries do it in mere months. We can protect our environment and our population but do it quickly. That's why I have announced I am committed to the Build Canada demand to reduce wait times for permits to 6 months. Next, the cap. The Liberals have imposed an energy cap. This will prevent our industry from growing and even force it to shrink in size, because the policy is to reduce the output of the industry. I have said I oppose the energy cap. And then we have the carbon tax, the famous carbon tax. You know, up until about 2 months ago, the Liberals said that if we didn't have a carbon tax, the whole planet would be lit aflame. If you tax the industrial backbone of the country, you tax every single person who lives in a modern economy. That tax increase will drive jobs away.
The Canadian Pharmacists Association is urging the federal government to remove all drug-related products from its list of potentially retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. The association says there are currently 8 pharmaceutical tariff codes on the list, but it's not clear which specific medications or drug products they include. The Pharmacists Association also says if tariffs on drugs are levied by the U.S. or Canada, it doesn't expect any immediate medication shortages, and the drug supply is stable. But it's concerned about potential long-term problems because Canada relies heavily on global supply chains for pharmaceutical ingredients and medications, including the U.S., China, and India. A worldwide crackdown on child pornography resulted in the arrest of an Edmonton man last month. Europol, German police, and the National Child Exploitation Crime Center told local authorities that an Edmonton man had allegedly accessed KidFlix, an online service that shares child pornography. Edmonton police arrested a 36-year-old man at a home in southeast Edmonton and seized his electronic devices. The man was released from custody but is to appear in court on April 14th. The Alberta government announced Wednesday that if Budget 2025 is passed, they will provide $8.5 million towards the Rural Utilities Program, which would help rural communities access critical services such as gas, electricity, and water. The announcement was made by Minister of Affordability and Utilities Nathan Neudorf at the Heritage Acres Farm Museum just outside Pincher Creek. $5.7 million will be committed towards natural gas, $700,000 towards electricity, and $500,000 towards water. Additionally, $1.6 million will be directed to the Remote Area Heating Allowance Program, which aims to bring relief to more than 2,000 households, the majority of which are from Indigenous communities.
The grants are distributed by our partners at the Alberta Federation of Rural Electrification Associations, an organization that dates all the way back to 1950. This funding means more families in rural and remote areas can keep their lights on and their homes warm. It means more small businesses can set up shop and contribute to local economies. And it means Alberta's agricultural industry can keep putting food on tables here at home and all around the world. There is additional funding in a number of different streams to help our First Nations and make sure that they attain both economic security and energy security. They often go hand in hand. We are working it's part of my mandate letter to make sure that we provide natural gas to those communities so they can further those goals and initiatives.
The Rural Electric Program and Rural Gas Program were each founded in 2013 and 2001, respectively. The Rural Water Program was more recently founded in 2024. Well, if you're one who tends to have a heavy foot and gets a lot of photo radar tickets, you may be happy about this. Alberta's overhaul to photo radar enforcement officially went into effect April 1st. The new regulations prohibit photo radar on numbered provincial highways and limit its use to school, playground, and construction zones. The new rules reduce the number of sites where photo radar could be used by about 70%, from over 2,000 sites to just 650 across the province. Many local police services are not happy about this move, as it means more traffic officers will be needed to patrol the streets. This includes Lethbridge's police chief Shaheen Medizadeh, who adds that not only is this a safety concern, but the reduction in revenue from photo radar, which mainly goes to the city, means we all have to pay out of our own pockets in one way or another.
So when you look at the reduction in revenue, even for the city, that money, because the city still has expenses, they have to pay for those, and some of this revenue was actually helping with those. Now, with the reduction in that, automatic reduction based on the new rules, if the costs are going high and revenue is not coming, the only way to generate that revenue would be through increase in taxes. So at the end, all of us would have to pay for the choice of a very few who choose to speed.
This overhaul enforcement will not affect red light cameras or photo radar at controlled intersections. Well, hundreds of workers at the meat processing plant in Brooks, Alberta may soon find their commute to work shortened. The province announced a $1.8 million investment in the enhancement of an agri-food corridor in Newell County. Brooks is home to JBS Foods, a meat processing plant which ships millions of kilograms of beef to restaurants throughout Western Canada. But according to the Premier, the limited highway corridor creates a bottleneck for both the shipments and the workers getting in and out of the plant at shift times.
The drive from the JBS plant to downtown Brooks is less than 8 kilometers, and it should take 10 minutes. Now, 10 minutes is a dream commute by just about anyone's definition. Unfortunately, for plant workers living in Brooks, 10 minutes from JBS to home remains exactly that, a dream. The reality is that the intersection of Range Road 150 and the Trans-Canada Highway creates a huge bottleneck. Drivers are challenged with safely turning onto a provincial highway with traffic coming at them at highway speed in both directions. And anyone who's made a hard left turn onto a highway knows you need a long, clear gap in oncoming traffic. Multiply that by the string of vehicles leaving the plant at shift change, and it's easy to see how this road can get backed up in a hurry. And I'm happy to announce that we are providing funding for a road that will connect the JBS food plant to Highway 873. This will enable plant workers to bypass the congested intersection and use a quicker, safer secondary route, cutting up to 45 minutes off the time it takes workers at the plant to get to and from work each way.
The $1.8 million investment includes a $1.2 million grant from the Strategic Transportation Infrastructures Program and $600,000 from the province. Well, Premier Smith has been pushing back against intrusion of federal policies. She's also approached Quebec Premier Francois Legault in forming a type of alliance for greater provincial autonomy within Canada, which has some wondering if a referendum on Alberta separation could be in the future. Tyler Dawson, Alberta correspondent for the National Post, explains more.
There's this method for the public to bring up a referendum, and that is actually true. It's called the Citizens Initiative Act. It was brought in by Jason Kenney, and the way it works basically is you need to gather, I think it's about 300,000 hard copy signatures from that's, sort of representing a majority of 2/3 of the ridings in Alberta, I think is what the math works out to. So it's a tall order, but a really determined group could canvass, could get all those signatures and force a referendum. So the question is a little bit at this hour, so to speak, whether or not those rules will stay the same or if those rules might be eased to make it a little bit easier to bring something like this forward.
Catch my full interview with Tyler Dawson from the National Post coming up right after business news. A recent initiative led by Call to Recycle is aiming to address improper battery disposal. The Recycle Your Batteries Canada program launched within the past month and encourages people to drop off old and dead batteries to various locations in your area and stresses the danger of improperly throwing away batteries, which can cause extreme fire hazards. Under the new Alberta provincial regulations that took effect April 1st, battery manufacturers, importers, distributors, and retailers are now held responsible for ensuring the batteries they handle are managed properly at their end-of-life cycle. The Recycle Your Batteries Canada program collected over 6.8 million kilograms of batteries in 2024. If you have old batteries ranging from AA's to e-bike batteries, you can visit the Recycle Your Batteries Canada website to see where they can be safely dropped off. A memorandum of understanding was signed this Tuesday between the city and University of Lethbridge. The new partnership focuses on operational strategic goals, reinforcing a shared commitment to benefiting the Lethbridge community. City of Lethbridge manager Lloyd Brierley explains the importance of this collaboration.
So the university and the city have worked together for I think almost 60 years now, but really formalizing this partnership and arrangement and how we work together and to define ways that we might be able to work together more or better in the future is really key, and it's something that's really important to me. I've had some experience with that elsewhere in my career, and I think there's immense value in doing this. It's really the benefit is for the community, the businesses, residents. Formalizing how we work together and what we might be able to do in the future is what's possible.
The memorandum we have signed today is to work together for the betterment of the city and betterment of the university. We attract a lot of students and employees to the city, and at the same time, when city is recruiting people to come to work for the city, people want to know where their kids can go to the education. So having the university right in town help attract the people. At the same time, when we are attracting companies to the surrounding areas and including the city of Lethbridge, those companies are looking for the talent, and the university provides that talent for companies to grow and be in the city of Lethbridge and choose the city of Lethbridge over other cities when they are picking the location.
Officials say working together to support each other will benefit the community for years to come. The African Children's Choir is singing its way across Canada with their Just As I Am tour. Children between the ages of 9 and 11 will bring their spectacular voices to audiences around southern Alberta. Our BCN's Heidi Echeverria has the story.
Singing is an art that expresses feelings through melodies. Some sing to express their intense love for God, while also exalting Him. Others, however, use this beautiful talent, which open doors to better paths. A group of 18 children with their spectacular voices celebrates the 40th anniversary of the African Children's Choir during their Canada tour, which began in British Columbia and will be here in southern Alberta this Friday.
Across Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and eventually end up in Ontario. They'll fly home from Toronto in the end of May. Creekside Community Church in Pincher Creek, April 4th, Friday at 7 p.m. What we've done is we've taken favorite and familiar hymns and we've put them to African rhythms, praise songs, African traditional dance. The heart of one man. He was doing work with the persecuted church back in the 70s. And on one of his trips, he was asked to give a ride to a little boy who had lost both of his parents. And he sang praise songs the whole journey. And that captivated our founder, Ray Barnett. He said, if the West could just see the beauty, the dignity, and the potential of the African child, they'd want to help. It was such a success. And then we were like, well, we need to raise money for them to go to school. And now here we are 40 years later, being helped by churches, sponsors, host families. This has been 40 years of faithfulness of the Lord. They're from very impoverished backgrounds, but it doesn't define them. They're bright, creative, intelligent, but they have no opportunity for education. And so all of these thousands of children lose that opportunity. And so we get to stand in the gap of that for the last 40 years. But there are hundreds of other children just like them that are in school because of the work of the choir. When the children are selected, they come to our training center for one whole year. So they go to school for 6 months, just schooling. During that whole time, there's morning devotions and evening devotions with their African staff. Then the next 6 months, it's schooling and rehearsal, and the devotional program continues. By the time they come on tour, they've been exposed to a lot of the Bible. We have our own secondary school, which is 6 levels. We pay their post-secondary education as well. Our 4 African chaperones that are with them, the 4 African adults, were all members of the choir when they were children. Education is very important in this life, but the word of the Lord is what's going to remain.
For BridgeCityNews, I'm Heidi Echeverria.
Sounds beautiful. Well, 2025 continues to not be a great year for air travel. Today, a passenger captured video after his American Airlines flight was forced to evacuate on the wing of the plane following a maintenance issue. The inbound flight from Charlotte Douglas International Airport landed at the Augusta Regional Airport in Georgia before passengers were evacuated from the flight. No updates yet as to what actually happened upon landing. Some more sad news out of Hollywood today. Val Kilmer, the versatile actor who played the fan favorite Iceman in Top Gun, donned a cape in Batman Forever, and also portrayed Jim Morrison in The Doors, died Tuesday night in Los Angeles from pneumonia. Kilmer had been suffering from throat cancer since 2014 rather. His last Hollywood role was in Top Gun Maverick in 2022. Kilmer was 65. He is survived by his 2 children, Mercedes and Jack, from a marriage to actress Joanne Whalley, which ended in divorce in 1996. Very sad indeed. I also liked him in Top Secret, and Tombstone is one of my husband's favorites. We need to take a short break, but I'll be right back with a peek at the weather. Well, welcome back. Mainly overcast skies today, but guess what? Some more snow this evening and into tomorrow as well. How's that for an April welcome? So we're seeing a chance of flurries, could see 5 to 10 centimeters overnight and into tomorrow. Thursday, looking at a high of 1 degree. After that, we're going to start climbing and the clouds are going to dissipate. We're going to see the sunshine again. So as of Friday, high of 14 degrees. And then as we get into the weekend, it's almost like none of that even happens. So we're seeing double-digit teen temperatures on Saturday and Sunday, high of 13. Saturday, Sunday, 16. Look at that temperature there on Monday. It's almost like we're in summers. Never mind spring. We're just going to skip right over spring, go straight to summer on Monday. High of 23 that day and then 17 on Tuesday. I'm loving those temperatures for sure. We just got to get over this crazy snowfall happening this week. So average high for this time of year, 11 degrees. Average low, -3. 21 was our record high on this day. That happened back in 2013. And back in, we got 2 records there. So 1936 and also again in 54, we saw the record low on this day, which was -22. Sun rose this morning at 7:06, sunset this evening at 8:04 p.m. We're now looking at 12 hours, 58 minutes of daylight, just under 13 hours. Days getting much longer, getting exciting there. So mainly sunny skies on the west coast tomorrow. High 13 in Victoria, Vancouver 12, sunshine, fog patches though dissipating in the morning. Now Edmonton seeing a high of -1 tomorrow, 30% chance of flurries tomorrow. But Edmonton just got dumped on 2 feet. I heard that it was the most snowfall people had seen in such a short amount of period. Calgary also not doing great. They're going to be expecting another 5 to 10 centimeters tonight, and then the snow easing up by the morning tomorrow there, 1 degree for the expected high on a Thursday. As we look to the rest of the prairies, we're seeing 30% chance of flurries in Saskatoon and Regina, -2 there in Saskatoon, -1 in Regina. 5 degrees for a high in Winnipeg. Could see 30% chance of flurries or showers, also mixed with some freezing rain there. Speaking of freezing rain, Toronto under a freezing rain warning as well as a rainfall warning, could see as much as 30 to 40 millimeters of rainfall tonight, and then another 5 millimeters tomorrow. High of 18 degrees though, 17 for the high in Ottawa. Ottawa also seeing a freezing rain warning in effect. They're still recovering from that ice storm on Sunday that left hundreds of thousands of people without power, and that's still an issue there. In Montreal, seeing rain tomorrow, high of 16 degrees. As we look to Atlantic Canada, we're seeing some ice pellets and rain in both Fredericton and Halifax tomorrow. Could see 15 to 25 millimeters of those ice pellets in both of those cities. High 1 in Fredericton, 0 for the high in Halifax. 5 centimeters of snow expected tomorrow in Charlottetown with a high of 0. And another 0 expected tomorrow for St. John's with beautiful sunny skies. So there you have it. That is your forecast. More than 3/4 of Canadian startups say tariffs will impact their business. That's according to a survey by Mars and Communitech Ventures, which found 38% of startups are expecting a direct impact as a result of the tariffs, while another 38% expect indirect effects. U.S. President Donald Trump has already imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, but additional measures are expected today. The survey also found the startups' top concerns are securing capital, attracting customers, and expanding to new markets. Rogers Communications and the National Hockey League have announced a 12-year agreement worth more than double the current rights deal. The new deal is valued at $11 billion for the national media rights to NHL games on all platforms in Canada. It runs through the 2037-38 season and includes rights across all platforms and in all languages for all national regular season games, as well as out-of-market rights for all regional games. It also includes the national rights to all playoff games, the Stanley Cup Final, and special events. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 273 points on the day to finish at 25,307. The Dow was up 235 points to 42,225. The S&P 500 was up 37 to 5,670, and the Nasdaq was up 151 points to 17,601. West Texas Intermediate oil was down 47 cents to 70.73 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to 4.01 US. Gold was up 14.52 to 31.2983 US an ounce. And silver was up 19 cents to 33.85 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.57 per bushel, barley is at $6.64, canola is at $14.28, and corn is at $7.87 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.25 to $2.1037. Feeder cattle were up 60 cents to $2.8887, and lean hogs were up 7 cents to $87.45. And the Canadian dollar was up over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 70.30 US.
Recapping one of our top stories today, U.S. President Donald Trump announced hits to multiple countries with his reciprocal tariffs on what he calls Liberation Day in the United States. These tariffs will increase U.S. duties to match the tax rates other countries charge on imports. Trump presented a lengthy list of what percentage tariff various countries will face under new measures, but he did not specify how Canada will be affected. Premier Danielle Smith has reached out to Quebec's Premier François Legault to possibly form an alliance for greater provincial autonomy within Canada. What might this alliance lead to, though? We will be talking to Tyler Dawson with the National Post about this and much more coming up next. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. Well, ever since Alberta's budget 2025 has been announced but not yet passed, it seems there's been a lot of funding announcements for where that money will be earmarked for. Also, the Premier and Alberta Health Services ending up in a little bit of hot water this week. Here to talk about it all is our legislative correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, welcome. Hello. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Okay, so Tyler, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, she's written to Quebec Premier François Legault. So both Quebec and Alberta have been pushing back against federal intrusion and policy for years. So does this mean that Smith sees Quebec as an ally in the push for more power for Alberta?
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, I mean, Quebec has sort of long been at the vanguard, so to speak, of sort of taking powers for itself away from the federal government and resisting federal intrusion into powers that, some of the provinces see as under their sort of constitutional jurisdiction. And Alberta's been following in Quebec's footsteps in a lot of ways over the past 5 or so years, really since Jason Kenney came in with the Fair Deal panel, all that kind of stuff. A lot of those ideas, which are not new ideas, date back to, sort of the firewall letter in, I think it was 2004, maybe 2006. They're older ideas, but some of them are things that Quebec has, already done. And so there is this sort of informal alliance already in some ways, I think, between Alberta and Quebec, an informal philosophical alliance, shall we say. Certainly there's no agreement whatsoever on some other stuff, pipelines, being the most obvious example. But the letter was sent and, it does seem clear that what Smith wants is sort of a united front, a common front against Ottawa between Alberta and Quebec to sort of protect, I guess, some of the provincial powers that both Smith and Legault feel the provincial government should have. Who knows what'll come of that, of course. François Legault's office saying on Tuesday, I guess it was, that they're thankful for the support and curious about the letter, and they're going to take some time to sort of evaluate their response. So we don't know what that's going to look like. But certainly this suggests some sort of diplomatic overtures, so to speak, from Smith towards Quebec.
Right. And speaking of Smith, so there's been talk that Alberta seems to be lurching towards a possible future separation referendum. And it first came up a few weeks ago in an interview, and then Smith's office has since told a separatist group that there are ways for the public to bring forward a referendum if they want. And then Smith, of course, also, giving that unprecedented national unity crisis, announcement if these 9 demands are not met by the next federal government. So do you think she's serious about all of this, Tyler?
I don't know. I think there's long been a tendency in Alberta politics to sort of cater a little bit to some of the most sort of alienated Albertans. This is a component of the United Conservative Party's base for sure. If you look at the polling over dissatisfaction of Albertans within Canada, NDP voters are generally pretty okay with Alberta's spot within Canada. But then if you look at the statistics on the polling data about United Conservative voters, and they're quite a bit angrier about Alberta's place within Confederation. So there's a very stark partisan divide here, and there's, I think, an electoral and sort of party politics benefit to this sort of being front of the Alberta government's agenda, if it's a Conservative government, at any rate. I don't really think she's serious about it in the sense that she's going to be the one who leads it. So as you mentioned, this had come up in a column, an interview that she'd done a couple weeks ago, and she'd also mentioned this unprecedented national unity crisis, which was a bit interesting because, what would be unprecedented, right? We had armed rebellion at least twice, I guess, in Canada's history, in 1867 and then again in 1888, I think, with Louis Riel. And of course, we had the 1995 Quebec secession referendum. So what does that mean in terms of unprecedented? And people sort of jumped on that and were like, oh, well, maybe that's a separation referendum for Alberta, which, would be unprecedented. But then on her radio show over the weekend, her Saturday call-in radio show, she said this idea that she was sort of pushing separation was nonsense. So there's that. But then there's also been some reporting that suggests that there is this method for the public to bring up a referendum. And that is actually true. It's called the Citizens Initiative Act. It was brought in by Jason Kenney. And the way it works basically is you need to gather, I think it's about 300,000 hard copy signatures from that's, sort of representing a majority of 2/3 of the ridings in Alberta, I think is what the math works out to. So it's a tall order. But a really determined group could canvass, could get all those signatures and force a referendum. So the question is a little bit at this hour, so to speak, whether or not those rules will stay the same or if those rules might be eased to make it a little bit easier to bring something like this forward. So the short answer is we just don't know. What she has promised is sort of another fair deal panel. If the Mark Carney Liberals win, there'd be sort of another version of this fair deal panel that Jason Kenney did back in 2019. And then we'd have to see what the recommendations from that were. Would there be a recommendation on a referendum in that? Really unclear, but certainly is, landing with a bit of a thud in the context of this federal election is certainly something that federal politicians are having to talk about. Something, no doubt, that I think New Democrats and Liberals are going to hope to talk about here in Edmonton and Calgary and Lethbridge and wherever else. So all in all, a strange time. And, I feel like we're back in 2018. It's sort of the height of the carbon tax bill C-69 kind of drama. I don't know where exactly this is coming from, but it does seem like the stakes have amped up a little bit in the last few weeks.
Yeah, okay. Well, thanks for the history lesson there, too, going back to all those dates. Good one on you. Okay, and there's a lot of controversy over this one as well. So Premier Danielle Smith was in Florida last week to speak with U.S. podcaster Ben Shapiro. And Shapiro has in the past made disparaging remarks about Canada and joked about it becoming the 51st state, although he has opposed tariffs on his show. But Smith has been widely criticized for this and also praised by others. So Tyler, do we know what happened during that private fundraiser? Smith indicated it was a great trip. So do you think she was able to sway Republicans' opinions about tariffs or about Alberta?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, perhaps she managed to sway some of the people in the room. I mean, her argument has basically been that, look, she's speaking in front of sort of Make America Great Again kind of audiences, influential conservative audiences, and that maybe that'll trickle its way up to the president or, Congress people and things like that. So it's hard to say what influence that's having, generally speaking. I do think that the controversy here has obviously affected the federal election. It was the sort of day one issue that Pierre Poilievre had to deal with when the election was called. In terms of what was said, I mean, we don't actually really know. And the reason for that is because Prager University, the sort of educational group that hosted her, hasn't released the video. The Premier's office hasn't released video or transcripts, if they even have any. So we don't know for sure. There has been some reporting on it. A couple news outlets got audio from the event and reported on that, and basically, talked about the Alberta-U.S. sort of energy relationship and tried to Smith started to avoid some of the issues around the 51st state stuff and that sort of thing. So I think politics watchers and journalists are, kind of hoping and waiting for those videos to come out to get a better sense of what was said down there. Because, of course, a few weeks ago, she'd gone on a Breitbart News podcast and made some comments about how Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were maybe more in sync with some of the goals of the Trump administration. And that really blew up in the federal election. So, I think when the Premier went into this conversation, she was probably very, very cautious about what she was talking about.
Yeah, I would think so. Okay, so Tyler, Alberta Health Services found itself in hot water this week after a memo circulated about giving food and drink to people in hospital, but it's since been paused. So Tyler, can you give us some more of the details about this?
Yeah, okay, so this is a really confusing one. So this memo was posted on social media by Paul Parks, the former head of the Alberta Medical Association, and it basically said that the government was going to be, or AHS, I guess, was going to be cutting off food for non-inpatient medical visits. So if you're, waiting for treatment or at a clinic or something like that, there wouldn't be food available. A couple parents posted on social media saying, what does this mean for my kid who's, undergoing chemotherapy and gets a popsicle sometimes and things like that? And then reporters got on it and wrote the stories about it. And what the AHS said was, no, this wasn't about taking food away from hospital patients. This wasn't about taking popsicles away from kids with cancer. This was about food waste. This was about making sure that food was delivered in a more efficient manner and that there was less waste within the medical system. But here's the confusing part. The initial memo said nothing about food waste. And this idea that, everyone had sort of misread the memo, that's sort of been the argument the government's making. Well, no, we were never going to do this. This was an old policy. And people had misread the memo. Well, it's not clear what there was to misread because, of course, the memo didn't mention the thing that they said this was about. So really confusing situation. The government, whatever the truth of the matter, backtracked really, really quickly. And I mean, you can understand why. I mean, going after or even being perceived to have been going after kids with cancer is, a completely untenable political position to hold. So it does seem like that policy is kiboshed. But a bit of a confusing and messy sort of 24 hours this week on that one.
Oh, definitely. Okay, we have got a federal election underway, in case you didn't hear about that. But
in case you've been just come back from the moon or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So Jagmeet Singh was the first leader to visit Alberta, and Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney right now are sort of focusing on other parts of the country. But Tyler, there are 37 seats up for grab in Alberta?
Couple more seats than last time. Yeah, there was a redistricting boundary changes that happened actually, and I think Alberta got 3 more seats. So, and that's just, our population grows, and every 10 years a commission looks at the electoral boundaries and moves them around and yada, yada, yada. Matters a little bit in terms of the Liberals' electoral fortunes in Edmonton and Calgary. Actually, largely will not affect the rest of the province. But the polling right now is really interesting because of course Alberta is going to send a majority of Conservative MPs to Ottawa. I mean that. I don't think that trend has ever changed. I mean, I think you need to go back to about 1949 to find a time that we've sent more than 4. The polling is suggesting that the Liberals might make some gains this time around, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 seats, actually. If it was 5, that would be a big deal. As I say, it'd be like 75 years since we'd sent that many. But it is going to be interesting to see when Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre come. Of course, both of them Alberta boys. Mark Carney grew up in Edmonton. Pierre Poilievre grew up in Calgary. But I mean, neither of them need to focus on Alberta. This is the the great Alberta tragedy. No one needs to focus on us to win a federal election. They're fighting over seats in sort of the Lower Mainland and the Greater Toronto area and stuff like that. The vote's pretty much fixed in Alberta for a majority of Conservatives. So it will be interesting to see what they say when they come here. what they're going to talk about. There's been some talk about Bill C-69, the Impact Assessment Act, over the last couple of days, some controversy over Mark Carney saying he wouldn't get rid of it. So I think when they do come here, certainly sort of energy politics and development are going to be absolutely front of center. But we'll have to wait and see when they decide to come out.
Okay, for sure. Photo radar also came to an end actually on April 1st. So ending everywhere except playground zones, school zones, construction zones. So Tyler, how much could this pull from municipal and provincial budgets?
A fair bit, actually. About $170 million is sort of the 2022-2023 figure for that. Now, the photo radar has been sort of steadily being pulled back over the last couple of years, even in advance of this. So I would expect the numbers currently are a little bit lower than that. But, not an inconsequential amount of money, especially in cities where photo radar sort of helps fund policing budgets and things like that. And this is a really interesting one because it actually put the United Conservatives in opposition to police forces across the province, which believe in photo radar as traffic safety measures, and obviously reduces the burden on them of having to police the roads. But of course, people who like to drive fast are going to like it, and I've certainly got some friends who have got kids and are constantly running late for everything, and they're pretty happy about it, and their spouses are happy about it too, that they're not going to be getting tickets in the mail. So, bit of a fiscal challenge for the government. Political challenge. I mean, I don't think so, unless we see absolute chaos on the roads in the next year. Then it might become a bit of a political issue. But the interesting thing is, as you mentioned, it is sticking around in these three spots: playground zones, school zones, and construction zones. And municipalities can actually apply to have photo radar at sort of high danger areas. There's a whole lot of red tape they'll need to go through to do that, but there still could be some photo radar. And for anyone out there who's thinking of driving really aggressively, red light cameras are still in effect. They have not got rid of red light cameras. It's just photo radar and speed on green. So a little public service announcement for everyone.
There you go. Keep that in mind if you're speeding to work, for sure. The Alberta government will spend $330 million on rural healthcare projects over the next 3 years, Tyler, and this includes hospital renovations and enhancement. And the hope, too, is that modernized facilities will help attract new doctors and other staff to rural areas to work. So do you think that this will work, Tyler?
It can't hurt to try, I think. It's sort of a dual-pronged problem, right? Is you have in the boom years, we sort of built all these hospitals and medical facilities all over the place, and they've been hard to staff and hard to keep up the maintenance on over the years. So certainly going to be some modernizing that goes into this. I don't think anyone in, Beaver Lodge is going to argue against the modernization of a health facility there. The question of attracting staff is, of course, the sort of longer running and other problem. And again, as I say, it can't hurt. You might get some new folks coming out if they get to work in a newer, updated facility. But as you mentioned right off the top, this is part of the sort of disbursement of some of that budget money. So we'll be seeing in a little more detail where that stuff's kind of going over the next little bit.
All right, we're out of time here, but Tyler Dawson, legislative correspondent with the National Post, thanks so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
The federal election continues with candidates jousting over how to deal with tariffs and how to make life more affordable. Now, indeed, these are important things, but which issues would be priority for Jesus? Should voters perhaps make some of the moral issues priority? And to what degree should Christians get involved in this election? Joining us to discuss this is Mike Schutten. He is the executive director of ARPA Canada, which stands for Association for Reformed Political Action. Mike, it's great to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
Now, Mike, I know that politicians aren't the answer to all of our problems. As Christians, we believe that God has the answers. However, God does seem to like doing things together with his children, including bring about positive change. To what degree and how should Christians get involved in a federal election?
Oh, I think there's many, many different ways in which Christians can get involved. Through the work of ARPA Canada, we're very much encouraging all of our supporters to get involved by certainly at the very least just highlighting some of the important issues facing Canadians and certainly issues that will have to be grappled with by our next government. But I think even more importantly, we're just really encouraging everyone to recognize that God has placed governments over us, Romans 13, for our good. It's our duty to respect and submit to them, but it's also our duty to be a salt and a light to them. And during an election campaign is prime time for that.
What would you say to viewers who may argue, you know what, my vote probably won't make a difference anyways?
Yeah, it's an interesting response. You do hear that from not just Christians, from neighbors, colleagues at work, etc. People will hear that. I think it almost assumes that unless your vote is the deciding vote in an election, like in a riding or a general election, then it doesn't matter. And quite frankly, I think that's a bit minimizing of the importance of our having our say in this constitutional democracy. In Canada, we are able to and have influence on who is going to govern us, and elections matter because it matters who is going to be the next government. There's two parties at the helm here in Canada, two main parties that will take Canada in very different directions depending on who's called upon to lead. So our votes do matter.
So let's talk about which issues would be priority for Jesus, because I know you believe that he would be concerned about MAID, which is medical assistance in dying. And we notice your ARPA website has an article noting that the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities released its report on Canada on March the 21st. The committee recommends that Canada repeal Track 2 MAID and also refuse to expand MAID any further. Can you explain why Track 2 MAID is so problematic?
Well, I think from ARPA's perspective, I would submit that all of euthanasia is problematic. Euthanasia is the intentional killing, the intentional taking away of someone's life, and that is problematic for ARPA Canada, and I would say for Jesus, for God's word. God's word speaks clearly to the value of life, our intrinsic value, not our extrinsic value. So I think that, but to the report that you just referenced is very providential. I would say that came out just a week prior to the election being called, and it shows to not just Canadians but to the rest of the world how out of line our country is when it comes to the rapid expansion of euthanasia in Canada. So what that report is calling for is certainly no further expansions, but it's also calling for, like you correctly asserted, a repeal back to a Track 1 only provision for euthanasia in our country. Now, Track 1 is what was initially legalized back in 2016 when our government legalized euthanasia. And what that means is essentially, to very quick summary, people whose deaths was reasonably foreseeable, so people with terminal illness who are in the very latter stages of their life, they could request and receive euthanasia, and they could receive it very quickly to deal with that intense suffering that might occur at the very end of their life. In 2021, our government, in response to a court decision, they expanded that further and created a second track. Now, people who apply under that second track, so for example, and some of your viewers might recognize this, veterans who are dealing with PTSD, people who are homeless and can't afford shelter, sometimes people who just simply can't afford medication to deal with the pain and suffering that they're going through, they can apply for euthanasia, for medical assistance in dying as well, but they're put onto Track 2, and in Track 2, there's a 90-day waiting period. So the intention behind that is that the circumstances by which they requested euthanasia, they might change during those 90 days and give them a chance to change their mind. So that's the Track 2. Now, where this particularly impacts Canadians is people with disabilities. People who are living with disability are able to apply for Track 2 MAID and are receiving it in our country. And the United Nations Committee that you referenced, it's very, very concerned with the reality that in Canada, able-bodied Canadians are protected by the law. So if they're suicidal, they get suicide prevention. But if a disabled person expresses a desire to end their life, they get suicide assistance, not suicide prevention. And they've identified that, I think, properly. That's very much in line with where ARPA Canada is at. We think a realistic first step for whoever forms the next government of Canada ought to be to roll things back to that, at least to that Track 1 provision only.
Now, abortion is the one issue that none of the major parties like to talk about. with the exception of the Liberal Party, which has a track record of bringing it up as a wedge issue, which they believe infringes on, quote, reproductive rights, as they like to frame it. Now, ironically, abortion sometimes infringes on the reproductive rights of men, but you believe abortion is actually a very real election issue. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think that it has been ever since 1988, when Canada's Supreme Court struck down the abortion laws in our country. Since that time, we have had no legal framework whatsoever for abortion. And that results in the latest numbers from 2023 provided by the Canadian Institute for Health Information show that those numbers are the highest they've been in the past 8 years, over 100,000 abortions in our country. And this is something that is, like you said, the Liberals like to use as a wedge issue. They clearly, their ideology dictates that they believe a woman can only be equal with a man if she has the right to abortion for any reason at any stage of her pregnancy. Conservatives, on the other hand, equally as frustrating, continue to just view preborn children as a political liability and refuse to entertain discussions about protecting them, even at the latter stages of pregnancy, even in the cases of sex-selective abortion. So that's very frustrating. And I think that from ARPA Canada's perspective, we just want to highlight how, as a country, it becomes increasingly challenging to expect God's blessing when we allow for the legal killing of 100,000 plus preborn children every single year. So we think that the time is now. Any time is a good time to begin protecting those preborn children. And we're going to continue advocating on their behalf because, as you and your viewers know, preborn children can't advocate on their own behalf.
So is there anything viewers can do to bring the abortion issue to politicians and voters to get their attention as to how significant this issue is?
Yeah, so that's a great question. ARPA Canada has a special webpage devoted to this election, and we highlight 5 issues there, of which euthanasia and abortion are 2 of them. And we're really encouraging people to understand that most of what we're hearing from the mainstream media, from the candidates, from the party leaders, is going to be things like what you started this broadcast off with, talking with tariffs, about Trump, about the economy. And I'm not saying those aren't important issues, but the reality is abortion, preborn human rights, euthanasia, those things are not going to be brought up unless we bring them up from a grassroots perspective. So we have on that webpage very focused questions that we're encouraging people to ask, whether it's candidates who come to your door, show up at a town hall and ask these questions. But we believe that candidates need to be asked, if elected, what are you going to do to change the status quo on abortion? Allowing 100,000 preborn children to die every single year in our country is not something that we can continue doing. On the euthanasia side, very same thing. If elected, what are you going to do to acknowledge that UN report and roll us back to a track 1 only system?
So you would agree that this is very much a grassroots initiative. We need to start from the ground up. You're talking about politicians knocking on your doors, but we would also need to influence and educate our neighbors and coworkers on where life begins as well, then, wouldn't we?
Very much so. So I would encourage people who are watching this broadcast to, when you go to work tomorrow, when you talk to your neighbors, ask them, say, hey, what do you think about this reality? And how can we make a difference? Plunk a sign in your lawn, put something on your car, go to that web page and use those questions it's up to us to bring this issue into the election narrative. And it's during election time when people are paying the most attention to some of these issues. And that now's the time when we have to highlight these ongoing tragedies in our country.
Now, you say that pornography and access to this by minors is something that Parliament should be addressing. I haven't heard anything on this so far from any party leaders. So what would you like to see Parliament do on this with our next government?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Pornography is an epidemic in our country. It's impacting so many people's relationships. And the tragedy is that it's available to children as young as 8, 9, 10 years old. So what ARPA Canada is asking for from the next government is to, at the very least, put in age verification programs, pass laws that ensure that if children go to a site, they have to verify their age. There's checks and balances put in. The UK and other jurisdictions have gone this route, and it's time for Canada to as well. Twice in the past number of years, this issue has been brought up both in the Senate, Canadian Senate, and in the House of Commons by the opposition, as well as the government. The Liberal government during its last term also recognized the need to do something when it comes to the ubiquitousness of pornography and the fact that minors are able to access it. That was buried in one of their other larger bills, and that bill unfortunately died on the order paper when the election was called. But we certainly don't want them to forget about that, whoever is going to form the next government, that they need to take action to protect minors from the access to pornography.
And how would that age verification work other than like just clicking on a button that says, I'm an adult?
Yeah, I don't know the exact ins and outs of how it would work, but we do know that other jurisdictions have put this into place. Often when we have these conversations, a lot of the opposition comes from people who are in favor of freedom, the freedom for people to access whatever they want. But I think society at large, public opinion is shifting. They're recognizing that this does have dire consequences for children, and we need to take some action. So I would implore whoever becomes the next government in our country to do that, to take action.
One other thing, gender identity is an ongoing issue in our nation, along with parental rights. Is there legislation you would like to see put in place to put some healthy boundaries in place to protect both children and parents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another good question. I think a lot of this, the policy changes that need to take place are going to have to be done at the provincial level. I think federally, where we're looking for from the next federal government is to reverse what's been called the conversion therapy ban in our country. So this very much impacts parental rights in the sense of ensuring that parents are not able to, unless they affirm their child's gender dysphoria and gender transition, they're unable to counsel, to bring them to counselors to get the professional help they need to deal with that gender dysphoria, essentially outlining what has often been called talk therapy in our country. This sends an incredible chill when that bill was passed on counselors, on pastors, on elders, and on parents. And so we're working with whoever's going to be the next government to ensure that that gets addressed so that we have maximum freedom and parents have maximum freedom to train their child in the way that he or she should go, as Proverbs says.
And one final question, because we're almost out of time. What about freedom of conscience for our medical professionals? Is there any changes you would like the next federal government to put in place when it comes to what our doctors can and cannot say?
Yeah, here again, there's a intersection between provincial legislation and federal, but certainly the federal government can take steps to ensure that freedom of conscience, a fundamental freedom in our country, is protected. And when we have jurisdictions here in British Columbia forcing essentially hospice facilities to facilitate MAID euthanasia, violating people's conscience left, right, and center. Ontario as well, mandatory referrals is something that's been passed in that country. That is not only impacting people and them having to violate their own conscience, but people who are unwilling to do that are exiting out of those healthcare systems. And everybody who's been following the healthcare debate in our country knows we need those people in our healthcare systems to care for those who need the care.
Mike Schutten is the Executive Director of ARPA Canada. Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
I really appreciate the discussion.
I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.